Hello everyone, and thank you for taking part in this slide. It's really interesting for us to see where you're all from, and also I thought for you to see each other as well. So if you haven't done it already, the code is up at the top, so you need to go to menti.com and type in the code 6436502. So I'll leave this one up for a little while I just do a quick introduction. So hello and welcome to our Boost Your Skills event, which is report writing from coursework to life skill. Our Boost Your Skills events focus on supporting students with study skills, employability and well-being. Before I hand over to Kathleen, I would like to just go through a few housekeeping points. This is a webinar, which means that you will not be able to turn your phones or cameras on, but we would love to hear from you. So please do join in the chat section and also with the live polls and interactive slides as you are doing, which is great to see. We are really looking forward to hearing from you. Kathleen will lead the session for about 45 minutes, which will leave time for a Q&A at the end of the event. This event is being live streamed to our YouTube channel and will be saved there. So don't worry if you've missed something. I will be sharing a link after the event. And we will also be showing Kathleen's slides because there is a lot of information on them. So without any further ado, I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Kathleen McMillan, and she is returning for another event. So I can vouch that the last event was really, really informative. So I think that this one's going to be a great one for you. Kathleen has had extensive experience of helping undergraduate and postgraduate students write up their reports across a range of disciplines, including the arts, social sciences, engineering, the natural and physical sciences, and medicine. She's also authored and co-authored several books that support students in developing the study and writing skills required at university. So without further ado, I will hand over to Kathleen, and we just have a couple of slides. So the first one has been done. Thank you very much for that. And we'll just move to the next one. So thank you for filling that one out as well. I can see that you've been filling them out as I've been talking. So I can see that there's quite a few students from Kathleen. We've also got some from University of South Africa as well. So hello to you. And then it's even split at the moment between postgraduate students and undergraduate students. If you can't get onto Mentimeter for whatever reason, you can pop in the chat what level of study you have, and we can go from that as well. So don't worry. So I'll just pop the slides back on. And Kathleen, are you there?
Hello, Jenny. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Sorry, everything became detached when we restarted the session. Okay, well, I just go for it then.
Yes, can you see the screen and everything okay?
Yes, I can, thank you.
Perfect.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see you, at least on the Mentimeter, and see where people are coming from and who they are. Just a couple of things before I start. One thing is I'm working between two computer screens, so if I look as though I'm not looking at your screen, I apologize, but I'm looking at the other one, which is necessary. The second thing is that these slides, as Jenny and I have agreed, are quite detailed. And as she said, the slide presentation will be available later. It's not intended that you read every single word as we go through. There just wouldn't be time for all of that, but it will be available later for you to read at your leisure. Okay, so thank you for the information about where you're from and interesting spread of people. I hadn't expected anybody from South Africa, but it's also interesting to see that the split between undergraduate and postgraduate is pretty even. So let's move on. In this presentation, there'll be 6 elements. The first of these is understanding what report writing is about. The second one is approaching the report project, your task, whatever that is. 3 are the fundamentals of structure. 4, the reports, the higher order skills and assessment that is involved in that, and framing your writing, essential features for each section. And finally, tips, which I'll actually give you throughout, but they're summarized at the end of the presentation on a single slide. I think there are a couple of bonus ones thrown in along the way, but the 10 most important are on the last slide. Okay, let's move on then. I wanted to establish that writing for reports for university has 2 strands. On the left, it's to meet course objectives. It's to help develop your learning, and it will contribute to your assessment. But on the right of the screen, in the sort of pinky colour, there's the other agenda, the hidden agenda of university reports. They are actually a training for your professional report writing activities once you graduate. And so I'll make reference to that throughout the presentation. So I'm weaving these 2 characteristics into the presentation. So today you may be viewing, because your interest lies in reports for professional purposes, but how you write for these contexts should be predicated on writing in-course reports. And you need to be confident that you're doing this as well to meet your tutor's expectations, because your tutor has a professional responsibility for training you to produce accurate, clear, and well-constructed reports. So understanding what reports are about on the next slide, we've got, really, it depends on the context, but there's describing an immediate event. So just some examples. There's recording a research process or an outcome. That could be a lab report. There's the third one is describing, analysing, and evaluating a situation. So that could be a medical report, an engineering report, a social work report. It could be another type of report, which is informing on progress in a situation or a condition. Sometimes that's called a SIT-REP, situation report. It could be for building safety, for example. And finally, it's enabling replication of a process to allow further development. This is not a comprehensive list. It's just some examples, but this is the straightforward bit. You need to have an understanding of the role of report writing in your academic and later professional life. So let's have a look at that. On the next slide, I've identified 3 areas where reports say something about you. In terms of coursework, that's an immediate engagement with the course and your assessment. It's in the moment, it's for a deadline, and it's developing your ability to work within time parameters by processing a lot of complex information and distilling it into a readable, manageable piece of text. As a learner, for learning, it's training in analytical and critical approaches to problem solving. And this is something where there is a huge leap between report writing that you may have done at school. Equally, there's a leap between a report that you've written as an undergraduate with the kind of report you might be having to write as a postgraduate. And that leads us to career progression. If you develop an ability to write a good report, it means that you can contribute effectively within a professional team. And it demonstrates your graduate skills of analytical and critical thinking. And so you can be identified by an employer as a successful problem solver. And most importantly, from you at this point in your career, you're citing these abilities or your ability to cite these abilities is a key attribute when you're framing your CV and making job applications. So we then have to think about who these reports are for. On the next slide, you'll see that I've got for you as a student, for you as a graduate, and for your readership. Now, for you as a student, it's fairly obvious you're making a contribution to coursework and assessment. It provides you with context to show understanding and learning, but it also provides you with revision material for unseen assessment. For example, it could be that the area that you've done your report in could pop up in a written exam, for example. For you as a graduate, as I've said, it demonstrates your ability to comprehend and analyse and evaluate issues. But it's importantly, it shows that you can take the specific out of the general. And for your readership, now, of these three, this is possibly the key to successful report writing. It evidences your understanding, your learning for your tutors. So that's a given. Your tutor is a specialist. To provide your employer with feedback on an aspect of their economic or industrial or a subject-specific activity, but it also provides insights to a particular issue for the non-specialist. And so when you're writing reports, you have to think of who that readership is. Is it somebody who is in my academic community, or is it somebody who's peripheral to that academic community? When graduates are working in teams, they often have, for example, an economist, a chemist, a statistician, and a manager. And they've got to all be able to understand the chemist's report. So the chemist therefore has to modify the way they write the report to meet the needs of these readerships who will not have the specialist share vocabulary. So we need to identify reports. There's up on the screen now, there are the ones that represent on the next slide, on the right, are parliamentary debates, which are reports, and these are word for word records of what is said in Parliament. And I've shown you the old-fashioned book format, but in many university libraries, you'll be able to see rows and rows and rows of these reports. Now, of course, it's all online. On the left of the screen, there are specialist reports, which are about environmental issues. And you see that there are many, many reports. They're all different shapes and sizes. But what I'm going to show you at the moment is, when I wave it up on the screen, is that we've got this kind of report, which is so thick. And we have this kind of report, which is not so thick. And we have some reports which are simply a couple of pages. So that kind of understanding of what's expected of you is important. So if we move on to the next slide, I've called these local reports. They're specialist or ad hoc reports. They're there for a specific purpose. You can get a draft report, for example, European Union Parliament draft report is something that will be on low-grade paper. It won't have a cover. It will be out there for discussion, but it will then be spruced up and made into a house style. There's a business report. It could be, I'm saying Investec, that's an investment company. So that could be giving kind of a state of the value of shares, for example. An engineering report could be bridge maintenance. An auditor's report could be the accuracy of a financial profile. So this diversity shows that reports are something of a pick and mix in terms of purposes and elements and readership and length. So you have to tailor your report according to the context in which you've been asked to produce that report. And at this point, I was going to ask what your discipline areas are. That's another type of slide I think Jenny's going to put up.
So we've already had a few people complete this, so thank you very much. If you haven't had a chance to go to menti.com, now is your chance to interact with this slide. So you just need to go to menti.com and type in 6436502. And it looks like most of the attendees are from sort of a medicine and health background. And we have someone in the chat as well saying adult nursing. So it looks like that's the highest numbers. We've got some social work and nursing in the chat as well. And then after that, it's a business and economics and social sciences. So it seems like that most people are from either medicine and health, business and economics, or social sciences subjects. Although we have a translation in the chat.
Right.
Oh, we can see some more people voting. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Medicine and health is still in the lead, though.
Right, thank you for that. Now, one of the next slides will actually explain something that I wanted to say about report writing and where people are coming from. So on the next slide, I've given an example of a coursework report. This is, well, for example, a medical report, which could be observational. One particular report writing area that my students covered was analysis of a new gait analysis machine. A laboratory report, observational, chemistry, biology, whatever science you happen to be in. A nursing report, which nurses will be recognized as probably a critical incident report. A social work report could be observational, for example, laying out the case for a particular kind of care package for a patient. So what we've seen from the diversity of your responses is that reports, again, will vary. And as I've said already, you have to tailor them. You may find that you're required to follow different styles for report writing, even within your course. And I think this is a point worth making. If your course straddles more than one discipline area, you may have to write 2 styles of reports according to these 2 different areas. And it will also vary, as I've said before, if you're writing for different readerships, the specialist versus the non-specialist. So you have to be prepared to adjust to the situation yourself. One point I wanted to make at this point was that you have to understand why reports have to be of a high standard. On the next slide, I list some of the reasons for that. They can constitute evidence in a court of law. This is where we're bringing back into relating to your professional report writing within your career. So you could find that a report you've written in a court of law is being used as evidence for a judge to make a decision. It can contribute to a legal decision, for example, someone taken into care or sectioned under the Mental Health Act. It can contribute to a medical diagnosis and treatment. And reports are often regarded as legal documents in some situations. And one that I only learned recently from my son was that, in fact, lab reports are considered to be legal documents and cannot be altered after they've been signed off. So that was, you're always learning new some things. So it's a preparation, as I've said, for professional practice. And all reports are important to the readership, but there are occasions where the report you might write could impact on another person's life. And these examples demonstrate that. So a report is not simply a chore that has to be completed casually. It can have serious consequences and should be treated responsibly and professionally. I felt that these were important points to make, although we're talking more about university reports at the moment. Right, so on the next slide, I have split it up into scientific and engineering reports, conveying information concisely and in a style that is clear and objective. That's the way to go. It provides sufficient information to allow another person to replicate the process, and it's presenting the findings in a way that's easily accessible to the reader, and it's interpreting results objectively and clearly. Now, I've read that out deliberately because you should note that in some disciplines and their related reports, these may fall into a style that follows a scientific rather than a non-scientific report. This relates to the earlier supremacy of scientific writing in academia, and there was a perception that in the softer disciplines, that in order to gain academic recognition and credibility, a scientific style should be followed. And modern conventions in such areas have tended to move away from this approach and have evolved their own styles. So on the other half of the slide, you will see that non-scientific reports may be presented, and I've given some headings there, as summary, acknowledgements, table of contents, introduction, main content, references, and appendices. So they're broadly similar, but broadly different. That sounds contradictory, but that's the history behind it. Now, if we move on to the next slide, we need to talk about housekeeping aspects of this, because you are faced with this job that you have to do. You have to write a report. the first thing to do is to consult the report writing regulations of your house or house style and create a working title. Now, if anything fails or lowers somebody's assessment, it's been their failure to consult the report writing regulations. So that's a given, but it's also an essential. You then need to identify, obtain, or create a template. Sometimes courses provide students with a template, and that will identify the font, the headings, the subheadings, the numbering system, the headers and footers, how graphs and tables are laid out, and a whole range of things. If not, then you have to create your own template, and it's a good idea to set that up so that you're not having to amend every title to make it bold and in point 28 or whatever. You have to also note any word limits or special regulations about glossaries, appendices, diagrams, and tables. I've put word limits there, and I've made a note to myself to say sometimes it's not a word limit, it's a page limit. So look out for that one as well. And remember that you may be penalised if you fail to follow the regulations or the house style. I've seen students who missed the prize for the best report because they hadn't done it, and somebody who was just in second place had done it, so they jumped into first place. But it's also worth noting that employers can be even more critical and rigid than your tutors, because your report can reflect well or badly on them or your employer. So don't think when you get away from universities that you can do your own thing. There'll be somebody looking over your shoulder to make sure you're doing it their way. So let's look at the project management. That you need to calculate time parameters, and you need to create a realistic plan that allows for context and purpose, identifying that, researching the topic, and the supporting and conflicting evidence that you may find, deciding how you collect and present your data. So will it be quantitative, which is numerical, or will it be qualitative, which might be reporting on interviews and observations and experiences? You need to construct a plan of the report explicitly. Which of these headings do you have to include in your report? You have to plan the writing and the component parts, and I'll come to that later. Writing the report itself, now, it may seem, you can say it quickly, but it's at this early stage, you have to take into account that writing up always takes much more time than you think it will. And so you have to be generous at this stage in deciding the proportion of time you're going to assign to the writing phase. And finally, if reading the regulations is important, so is the final point here, which is reading through and editing and refining your text. You can refine your text to get it down to the word limit, and you need to read through for clarity, for missing words, for misspellings. That's the editing part, and so on. So all of that has got to be part of your project management. Now, so the next thing is about material gathering. You need to start working through your literature, identifying the sources, applying to your report. The advice here is always note reference details, including page numbers. Even if you have decided not to use that in material in the end, you might come back to it. And then from that, you want to formulate a provisional hypothesis or establish what the current perceptions are. Aims and objectives of your report, just a word there. Aims are the end goals, and objectives are the steps towards those, to meet them. They're not one and the same thing. Then you need to start gathering your data in suitable formats. Now that could be graphs, tables, lists. It could be observations. It could be drawn from interview responses and so on. You need to analyze that report and, that data and information as you gather it, making notes of, well, what was important about that bit? The critical thing is not to say, I'll remember that, because you won't, or I'll think about that later, because you very often won't. And then you've got to interpret your results, findings, and observations. Now, a tip here is to keep a report or log diary listing what you've found and created and stored so that you can be more efficient when writing up. It also gives you a sense of progress, but in some instances, you may actually have to submit the diary as part of your evidence for your report. So it's got to be legible, which is because it's probably more likely to be handwritten. Right, moving on. You know, this next slide I have to defend by saying that, yes, it is too detailed to read, but simply what I've done is I've taken and put into alphabetical order all potential headings that might crop up in reports. It's not very helpful in itself. It contains elements you won't need, but equally it contains those that you will need. So you may find that I spoke earlier about things differing between one report you might have to write for one subject in your studies and a different report for another subject. And so you may find that you're using these headings in one report, but not the other. Now, the next slide is frighteningly detailed, and I make no apology for this one, because what I'm trying to do is to take you through a kind of quick comparison. On the left, there's scientific and technical reports, and there's 4 columns underneath, one showing a chemistry report, the next a medical report, the third one a psychology report, and the fourth one a technical report, which could be an engineering report. On the right side, we've got non-scientific reports, and I've mischievously put geography in there because that kind of straddles scientific and non-scientific. And the second one in that half is literature survey or a dissertation. And the third one, a typical business style report. So what I wanted to do was, by colouring it, I'm trying to demonstrate that the title page is common to all. Of course it is. Abstracts appear in some, but not all. And if they do appear, they're maybe not in the second position. Abbreviations appear in some, but not all. Then there's a table of contents in some, but not all. It depends on the length of the report, whether you would have a table of contents. The next bit is the introduction, and that is, sorry, a question has just come up. A nursing report would fall into a medical report, okay? But I'll come back to that later. And I'm sorry, we can't enlarge the tables, but you will be able to look at them later. Sorry, that was a comment to something in the chat. Right, so we have a literature review, which are the sort of greeny turquoisey ones, and these can be terms of reference and scope as well. Materials and methods appear in the scientific ones and pseudoscientific ones. The main body of the report in the literature survey and the business report would perhaps include the methods and materials, if that's important. Results or findings common to all, but again, they may be subsumed into the main body of the report and not actually identified as a separate section. Then we have discussion and conclusion. These terms are interchangeable. And I've put in for the technical report recommendations. Now, recommendations often appear in the conclusions section, but some disciplines require a separately headed section on recommendations. Remembering that many people who read reports want to get the message as quickly as possible. And so they're going to read the abstract and the recommendations or the conclusion before they read all the intervening stuff. BA Education Studies, as a question come up, I would put that into possibly the literature survey one, but we can maybe address that later. Right, references come into all of them. Even a technical report, you may have to refer to the legislation on which the report is written, or the British standards or whatever. Right, so I apologise for that slide in a way, but again, you can look at it later. Maybe, Jenny, you could keep a note of the questions and I can answer those at the end rather than interrupting myself every so often. So if people can be patient till that moment, I'll deal with them later. Right, the next thing is, what does the reader expect? And I had a very helpful tutor many, many, many years ago who said, right, what, in regard to your report, what is this about? What's the aspect? How will it be examined? What did you find? And finally, and I think most dramatically, so what? So let's look at those headings again, these questions again, and map them onto the elements of a typical report. So you will see that in the next slide, we've got what's this about, which is the summary, abstract, and to some extent the introduction. Number 2 is what's the aspect, that's the introduction. Number 3, how will it be examined? Well, that'd be materials and methods. Number 4, what did you find? That would be results and findings. And the so what answer is the conclusion and recommendations. Now, I think that's quite a useful little bubble to bear in mind, because if you are thinking, how am I going to write this report, and I'm not confident about writing this report, answering these questions is what should be in your mind at the head of each section. And it becomes much more like a conversation you're having with your reader, rather than an ominously evil writing task. So moving on, we'll move on to writing the specific elements in a moment. But firstly, we need to consider the thinking skills you need to apply to your report, because this is where report assessment matters. Well, what you write matters for your assessment, I should put it that way. The reasons for the report and the content are relevant to the task, but it's also important how you formulate the information. And you need to be aware of how you create the text for each element to demonstrate the higher order skills of analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. So to simplify, the lower order skills are describing or narrating, saying what something looks like. And these apply to reports, to the introduction, the methods, the materials, and the reporting results. You're painting a picture, you're telling people what it's about and what you are looking at in particular. So it's describing, and some people would say that was a lower order skill. It's easy to do. It's in the sense that you have ownership of the information. The higher order skills are analysing, synthesizing the information you've gathered, evaluating it, and creating a new understanding. And if you map that on to the sections of the report, you've got a literature review, which is interpreting the results, drawing conclusions, and making recommendations. So that's where the significant emphasis is on my reading of a student's report. What have they done here? Because that's showing their abilities. Describing something, yes, it shows an ability, it's a skill, but it's not what I'm about. I want to know what they've understood and what they think is important. So moving on to that, I've put in the thought bubble there that is critical thinking and reflective skills, because these will be terms that will be used in the descriptions of your reports. And when people are explaining how you will be assessed, those are terms they will use. So moving on, we'll look at the higher order skills as we go through each of these. I just wanted to say something about report writing as a kind of genre. Reports can be characterized as being written in a different style and construction from essay writing. So if you're good at essay writing, it may be that you're not necessarily good at report writing. It's a different art form. It's written in stylized forms. So scientific reports often use a sentence that says, although X is known, features of Y are not well understood. And if you've listened to some of the medical experts who've been on our televisions talking about pandemics, you will have heard them say that sentence, that type of sentence, quite often. So reports they're used for a variety of purposes across the disciplines. Some can be formal, some can be less formal, and some can be informal. An informal report can be just a record of what was agreed in a meeting. A less formal one might be one which says, well, what's going to happen next in a process in the lab, and formal will be the formal final write-up. So it has to be written in a format that gives the reader quick access to the key information. And I remember a vice principal in a university saying he only read the first page of a report. If he hadn't got the message by that time, he didn't read the rest, and he just discounted it. So it's a value lesson in that one. Right, we're going on to talk now about the abstract. I've said that before we do that, let me just say that you can approach the writing incrementally. You can write little bits at a time. You can follow the headings given for each section that will come up soon and write some sentences that expand that heading. And the advantage there is that you've got the basis of your text. You've got something on paper and you can develop that as you go along. Right, so the style here of the writing the abstract, it's laid out as under the two headings, scientific and non-scientific. That was answering the question, what is this about? Now, you will find in writing a report that sometimes you feel I've said this already, and writing the abstract, which is the thing that you'll write at the end of the process, you'll feel, but I said all this in the body of the thing. Well, of course you have, but this is 50 to 150 words that will give the reader the message you want them to get. So it has to be written carefully, and I'm going to use it as a model to show what I mean about writing incrementally and writing in response to the section heads. If you look just quickly at the slide that says the scientific, it's background, purpose, methods, results, conclusion. That's a shorthand snapshot. There's non-scientific, context, aim, purpose, nature of investigation, findings, conclusion. It's the same thing really, it's just using different words to describe them. Now, again, I apologize for this detail on this, but I wanted to demonstrate this all on one slide so that I could make the point. Right. If you look down the right-hand side, I've got the headings for each section. Now, these headings do not actually go into the abstract, but I have set in the yellow line, I've set the scene. Studies have shown that removing pavements inhibits traffic speed. The next word, however, says, right, I have an issue here, something that is not complete. It's a gap, really. And it's about street furniture, but the key word is however. Moving on to the next section, this is about purpose. I'm stating that there is a considerable amount of information on such traffic, traffic calming in the Netherlands, but, and here's where I'm taking you to my purpose, this is yet to be addressed in the United Kingdom. So I've set the scene, I said what specifically I'm going to do, and then in the next sentence, I'm explaining how I do it, which is sustained monitoring areas with speed cameras and streets with these features was used to measure their effectiveness. So that's the method. And then the results, data gathered over 6 months in a trial in Edinburgh, goes on to say that street furniture is potentially more effective. And then finally, in the conclusion, further studies could examine whether chicanes might be even more effective since street furniture hampers pedestrian use. Now, could and might are critical at this point because that's tentative. It is a mistake in a report to say this is the case, this is what must happen, unless you've been commissioned to make that as a statement. But most recommendations are couched in tentative language: could, might, may. So just to show you what that would look like in the next part, that's how the condensed part of the abstract would appear. I've taken out the headings, but that's what the message is in these groups of sentences. And it takes 102 words. Now, you're allowed a little leeway on the abstract, but not much. So just that is giving you the tip that I wanted to get over, that you can break each section down into subheadings and write to each of those. You strip out the subheadings afterwards, and then you can develop linkage sentences to make it a coherent text. So we'll go and look at writing the introduction now. In this case, we've got the context of the study, literature fundamentals. The gap being identified is actually the key to this is what my thesis is about, my report is about. And then the aims, objectives, how I'm going to do this, what I'm aiming to do, and what the value is. If we look at the non-scientific side, we've got a general background, the aspects of the topic covered by this, that's the literature, the need for further investigation, the purpose of the current study, and justification for the study. So there are subtleties of difference in there, and the people who've been asking about nursing, social work, education, these are the kinds of things that approaches that you need to think about and when constructing your introduction. I was going to say you could draft your introduction at an earlier point in the writing and go back to it later. Now, the next section, the literature. I'm seeing time marching on, so I'm going to talk more quickly, I think. Right, the questions you ask yourself when you look at the literature: who's the author? Are they well respected? What's the main focus of the paper? Is it relevant? What's the reason for the paper? Was it sponsored or is it for academic education and introspection? What are the main findings? Are they valid? Are they repeatable? And what are the main issues? The key arguments? Are they strong or weak? And are they legitimate in the sense, are they balanced and fair? Right, the critical review of scientific and non-scientific, this is where analysing goes on. It's an assessment of the work reported and you're identifying strengths and weaknesses. So in this literature section, you're looking at main issues, the basis of evidence, the questions tackled, and the balance within the paper, and compare that one paper with others in similar areas, tackling it perhaps in slightly different ways or coming up with different conclusions. That's where the analysis comes. Now, I had toyed with the idea of putting in a section on how to do citations and referencing, but there really isn't time to include that, but it is covered in the book that will be recommended or shown to you at the end of this this presentation. But the choice of referencing systems, I've listed some there. There's a subject specific type, American Psychological Association, which is very, very specific. And it refers not just to the referencing system, the citation mode, but also how you write, that you write in the first person and not in the passive. Chicago, Harvard, Modern Languages, Vancouver, that's just 4 random ones. They're the most popular, most frequently used. The Harvard one is the easiest, I think, and is one that many disciplines embrace. Right, if we go on to the next slide, which is the materials, I've got some examples there. They're showing how to describe things. Just a quick tip there that if you're having to describe equipment, then you do it from, you can do it from front to back, top to bottom, east to west, how things operate together. If you're doing something on the side of process, then it's a sequence of events or how something works. And Serve the Instrument gives an overview and you write to subdivisions. That answers the question, how will it be examined? But it's describing, and I've talked about that already. Some methods, again, this is describing, there's observations on placement on the next slide, developing a model, surveying a questionnaire, the administration of it, statistics, how they were compiled, and the analysis of literature resources. Again, it depends on your topic. Now, the next slide, I'm just going to say a word about the writing up the methods and materials sections. There's a way to do it. There's an overview, there's a sample restriction and a technique, and I'm just demonstrating these with some cue sentences that would begin these. So the purpose of the study was to identify, that's the overview, and the sample restriction would be the study group comprised, and the technique was subjects were asked to whatever. Again, I see some things coming up in chat, and I'll answer these questions at the end. Moving on to the results, there are 3 options, and it's worth noting that you need to go back to the literature in your own field and see what the pattern is that's used in your discipline area. Option 1, you go with location, results, and comment, and I've put in some sentences there that just demonstrate each of those. So location, where it is, it's table, what the results are, and this can be explained by, okay? The next option is option 2, being figures and tables with statement of results followed by a comment. And option 3 are the most significant results, the figures giving the details and the comments. So the first 2 elements are reversed there. Now, just to go back to my slides, what I wanted to say there, that is sometimes you're in a situation where you don't see very much in a graph that you've drawn. Change it to a chart or a table of some description, and you may find that you see things in that different format that you didn't see in the graph form, and so you can do it vice versa. And a point to note when using figures and tables, this is just a presentational thing, that figures go beneath and the legend with tables goes above. Right, so moving on to the discussion and conclusion. Again, a list of questions. It's a good idea to almost write out these or type out these questions and populate the space beneath it with answers to the questions. You can do it in a shorthand way, and then you can write it up into proper text. So the main context, the most important findings, the limitations of the findings, the implications, and finally, what the recommendations are for further study. Now, I mentioned that earlier, that recommendations are sometimes a separate section, but often they're not, and they're included in the discussion bit. And here, and I've got analysing and evaluating, that's what's going on there. And it answers the question, the last one, what are the recommendations for further study or action? That's the so what question. So there has been something, there have been a few questions about reference lists. Let's just go back to making the point that when you create a reference list, it's everything that you have included in your report. A bibliography, and this is response to a question, a bibliography is a list of all the reading that has been done. But some disciplines call a reference list a bibliography, but it's the same as a reference list. It gets very confusing. So that's why you need to go to the regulations for the instruction on what reference system to use. If you're in doubt, you can ask your tutor, but if you go to your university library, there will be a librarian who, in your discipline area, who will be able to help you with the detail of that. So working with reference systems, you need to set up your reference system. You can use a list system, you can use a software. EndNote was one of the early ones, there are others now. You need to follow the regulations, and as I've said, ask the librarians, but you've got to keep it simple. A complex piece of software might involve a huge investment of time, and do you have the time to learn that, how to use that piece of software? It will detract from the time you have to write the report, and making your report good, tight, analytical is more important. Be sure that you're consistent in that you follow the recommended system exactly. Okay, and finally, editing your text. Be sure to do it. That's my quick message. Read it aloud to detect errors, get somebody else to read it aloud, or read it aloud to somebody else, not necessarily somebody in your discipline. And if they're saying, what does that mean? You've not explained it well enough, and you need to go back and correct that or amend it in some way. Cut out unnecessary words. Just look at the line above, read it aloud to detect errors. I could have just said, read aloud to detect errors. There's one word lost. And when you're trying to cut your word count down, one word is an important word to lose. Monitor the word count and don't overrun the limit. And it might be pages that you're given as the definition of your the length of the report. And look on the revision of your reference list as part of the editing process, remembering that it can be time consuming. Now, a lot of what I've said today has been covered in the study skills book that Jenny will show you at the end, that I authored and published in 2021. And it's got many more examples and tips. Now, I have 10 top tips for successful report writing. They're there on the screen. And I understand that you will be able to see this presentation on screen again, and you will be able to see the slides. So rather than go through what you can read later, I think it would be better if Jenny's in agreement that we actually tackle some of the questions. Would that be all right, Jenny?
Yep, that would be perfect. So as we said, the slides will be shared, so don't worry about so if you've missed anything, all the details will be sent to you, and you can watch the video of the event afterwards. So I will be sending out a link to that. So we've had a few questions popping up. I think some of them you've answered as we've gone. I think it was along the same line as the difference between references and bibliography. What's the difference between an abstract and an introduction?
Right, I'm glad you asked that one because it's key. As I said, there are times where you think you've said the same thing more than once. It's the nature of the report, because the report is something that is read in fragments. Somebody might read the abstract but not read the introduction. The abstract is a snapshot of the totality of the report. The introduction is a much more detailed examination of what is happening in considering the context of the report. So the snapshot, 150 to 150 words, the introduction could be pages long. Okay, I hope that answers the question.
Okay, and we have a question saying, did you say that social work uses non-scientific report writing?
I think I may be trying to dodge the issue here, but I'm not really. Social work tends to follow, like education, a kind of more literary approach. It can, though, depending on the context, it can go into the scientific mode. And this is where finding the regulations, sorry, I know I'm keeping saying this again and again, look at the regulations and find out what sections are required. Then you'll know what style you're following. But, you know, there isn't a sort of, as I said at the beginning, this is a pick and mix affair. There isn't one only type of report that will be written in scientific notation. So you have to look at what you're being asked to do and make considered and intelligent decisions about that. That's part of it. That's part of the analysis. Can you make a reasoned representation of what you've been asked to examine in a way that is reader friendly? And I would put reader friendliness as the most important, and more important than agonizing about whether you call it methods and materials or you call it a research approach. Okay.
We have another question that might be a similar answer. They're asking about writing in criminology. If you've got any recommendations on how to write for that area.
Well, I think in my career, I thought I touched on most disciplines, but criminology I have not. I would imagine that if you're looking at something where there had been a scientific side to it, looking at evidence, and that would be scientific. If it was criminology, I would say it would be more like a law report, and that legal reports are a different creation, and you would have to look at what was required. Again, sorry, back to your regulations. I would say it would be non-scientific for if it was evaluating the jurisprudence of it, if for want of a better expression, the legal side of it. But if it was looking at criminal evidence in terms of blood groups, whatever, then you would go in a scientific mode.
We've got a question here. Oh, they've just corrected themselves. Thank you, because that was very good timing. I was just going to say I assumed that it was slightly wrong, but they were asking what the difference is between qualitative and quantitative research.
Right. I could take the easy way out and say spelling, but right. Quantitative research is where you gather information that is numerical, statistical, involves number. Qualitative is where you are looking at information that represents ideas, observations, just looking at people, individuals, at types of situations. So you're looking at the quality of somebody's situation. For example, let's look at nursing. Qualitative research there, or qualitative report, would be one where you might be looking at the journey of a patient from admission through to discharge, and you'd be discussing how the patient reacted to the procedures, to the environment, to the progress of their recovery, the administration of their recovery. So it's talking about it, it's discussing, whereas the quantitative is looking at the figures and interpreting ideas out of those figures and discussing those. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, and we've got another question saying, how do you present ideas based on your personal belief or experiences? If you don't have a reference, obviously it's your own experience.
Right, I'm not sure if the person means that they want to say this is my opinion, or whether they want to say I saw this, or I have written this, and I therefore want to cite myself as the source. If it's the latter, then you would write down personal essay or personal diary record and give the date. If it was because you wanted to express your opinion, you have to be very careful there, because reports, I said it was stylized in its writing, and in most cases, reports are impersonal. You may think something, but you can't say, I think. That would be just not acceptable. But what you might say is, you could couch it in a way that said, some commentators have held the view that, and then you can give your opinion. But you're not actually citing it. Or you could say, there is a school of thought that understands this to be the case. So the words you use are important in allowing you to give an opinion, but without saying, I think. Okay. And I'll put one caveat in that. If you're doing a critical incident report, for example, for nursing, or you're doing something in social work where, as I saw once in social work, I was actually witness to a child being beaten by a parent. And I had to report that, and therefore I had to say I witnessed the event where the father hit the child. So there are times where you have to put that in as evidence. Right, next one.
Okay, next question. How do you choose the statements from journals or books? So I think that's to include in the report itself.
So you want to make an actual statement. I think if I very quickly explain this, and I'll give Jenny the slides, which I actually included in the previous webinar I did on dissertations. I will quickly describe what you need to do. If if it's something that's well established, you use an information prominent statement. So it is well acknowledged that pavements in the Netherlands are no longer constructed, and I would put Van Gogh 2021, okay? If it was something more, sorry, Van Gogh would have had to be 2010. If it was something that was more recent, then you would say Van Gogh 2021 has noted that, or has reported that traffic lights are unnecessary in many Dutch towns. So the more immediate, you put the person's name in the sentence with the date. Now that's using a Harvard method. Now for quotation, if it's a short quotation, you can put the short quotation in the sentence and put the person who wrote it and the date at the end of it. But you would say, possibly it was noted, bloody, bloody, blah, and then by whoever the person was. But if it's more than 3 lines, then what you would do is you would type it into the report, indented on both sides of the chunk that you're quoting, and you would put the person's name at the right-hand side underneath the quote. As I say, a lot of that is in the study skills book, and it's too difficult to explain it without being able to wave my hands around. I hope that helps.
We're running a bit short on time, so I'll just ask one more question, and then I think that, like Kathleen said, there's a lot of the answers to these questions in Kathleen's book, so I'll tell you about the book at the end. Hopefully this is a fairly easy one to answer. Someone's asking about if there's any rules for using tenses when citing other authors' ideas in the text. They think that the present tense is usually used when it comes to in-text citing, but they just wanted to double check. If my husband were here, he would tell you that I bounce up and down every time a certain historian comes on and tells her version of history using the present tense about events that happened 4 centuries ago. Right, so if you're looking at something recent, you would say blogs 2021 states that, but in some disciplines it would be stated that, held the view that, holds the view that. The more immediate it is, I think you can use the present tense, but if it's ancient history, then I think that you would use a past tense. And again, a passive, but we won't even go there because that's a whole new webinar. Okay. Right, so
somebody feels that their questions are being ignored. If that person...
apologies for that. I have skipped a few that I thought had been answered, and I'm afraid we just don't have time to go into every subject about which is scientific and which isn't, just because we don't have much time left, I'm afraid. But if you check on the list that Kathleen had on her slides, you may be able to answer your own question on that one. So we're just going to quickly tell you about the book. So this is the link to Kathleen's book. I will be sending it out on the follow-up email as well. So I'll just show you the book here. So this is on our website. So if you are a student that uses the engagement portal that we work with in partnership with the universities, this will be a very familiar site. If you don't attend one of the universities that we currently work with, then you can still purchase the book. And like I said, I will be sharing a link to it. So don't worry, the link will be coming out. But this is the book that Kathleen's been talking about that has the best sort of up-to-date guides about how to write reports.
And cite references.
Yes, yeah. So that is the end of the event. So thank you very much for coming along. And like I said, we will be sending out an email which will have the link to the video for the event. It will also have the slides, and we will also have information about the books if you want to purchase them. So thank you very much for coming. And if you do want to attend any of our future events, you can sign up on Eventbrite. You can agree to be mailed on there, or you can also join our mailing list. So I will share the link to that as well, so you can pop your details in there and you'll get an email about each event as it comes up. So thank you very much, and thank you, Kathleen, again for an excellent presentation.
Thank you. It was lovely to speak to you, all of you. Bye.